Hi everyone, it's Lisa. Thank you so much for joining me today. In today's video, I'm going to be making two cards with the Simon Says Stamp Painted Leaves stamp set. This stamp set is part of Simon Says Stamp's STAMPtember release, which releases September 1st, 2020. So here's what the stamp looks like. You have these 4 sets of leaves. Now these are solid stamps, so there's no coloring involved. You just have to use your inks and ink them up with any color inks you want and then stamp them out. There's also some separate stamps there for the stems of the leaves. So you can actually have your leaves in one color and the stems in another color. And then there's some sentiments: thankful for you, thinking of you, thanks, and fall blessings. So this set is perfect for fall cards, but also for everyday cards. If you need to send just a thank you card, you can definitely use this set. So I'm going to be starting out here by making a slimline card, and I'm going to be using these stamps to make a pattern on my card front. Basically, think of it as making my own pattern paper. So I'm just positioning all of these solid stamps in a random order. Some are off of the cardstock and some are completely on the cardstock. Just placing them in a random order, and then we'll be stamping them down. Now that cardstock layer, it is a white piece of cardstock, and that is measured at 3 1/8 by 8 1/8. And when I started this card off, as you see here, that card front was actually slightly larger. After I stamped it all out, I ended up cutting it down, and the final measurement for that white piece of cardstock was the 3 1/8 by 8 1/8. So here I'm using some inks by Gina K Designs. This is the Autumn Premium Die Ink Cube set, and Simon Says Stamp does sell this set, and they come with all of these fun colors. I think there's a couple other colors that I don't show here on the screen, and they're basically great for autumn cards. So it's kind of like just an autumn color scheme, which I love. So I added the inks to the leaves and then stamped them down. Now some of the ink cubes in this set have a light and a dark ink in the same color family. So right here you see me stamping up the red color on this leaf at the top right hand corner. I put down the lightest color red first to cover the entire leaf, and that was called the tomato soup color. And then just on the edges I came in with the faded brick, which is a darker ink, and then just used that little finger dauber to smooth out the lines on the stamp, and then press down again to stamp that image. And what that does, if you look at that red leaf in the top right hand corner, it has darker on the outside and then lighter in the middle. Now that teal color leaf, I only had one ink color in that particular color. So I stamped it down first to put an entire layer of ink, and then I took the same ink pad and just inked up the edges several times and then stamped that down. Just by adding more layers of ink on the edges, you can make it look like it is a darker and a lighter shade. So that teal color is Blue Lagoon, and then for the purple color, I only had one purple ink pad in this set, which is Wild Lilac. So I did the same thing. I stamped it down with the Wild Lilac, and then I just put the ink again over the edges of those leaves, used my ink dauber just to smooth that out on the stamp, and then press it down. You can kind of see how it's giving me a two-toned effect there. And then that light yellow color, that one is called Sweet Corn. And with the sweet corn, I stamped it down once, laid the color down. That was the lightest color, but then this yellow color also had a darker ink pad in that package, and that is called Mustard. So I was able to put the darker ink on the edges of that yellow leaf. So once I finish the top portion, I need to reposition those leaves again. I made sure that I cleaned those stamps off, and then I repositioned them again on the cardstock, and then did the same process again. So again, the ink colors that had more than one ink in the color family, I just stamped those up with the lightest ink, and then press that down, and then I just go in with, if there's a darker ink in that color family, I put the darker ink around the edges, press that down, and it gives me that nice two-tone effect. So again, with this red one, it's the faded brick in the dark and the tomato soup in the light. And then in the yellow, I used sweet corn for the light and mustard for the dark. And then that teal and then the purple colors, those are Blue Lagoon and Wild Lilac, and there was only one color ink for those. So I just re-inked up the same ink pad on the edges just to give it a little bit of a darker look. And I just finished up the process all the way down that piece of cardstock. So next I'm going to come in with the stamps for the stems, and this package of stamps is really easy to know which stem goes with which leaf, because when you have the stamp set in your hand, you'll actually be able to see that they're lettered. So the solid stamp has the same letter, for example A, as the stem that corresponds to it. That would be labeled A as well. And then one that's labeled B, the leaf will have the B and the stem will have the B. So you'll be able to know which one goes with which. And you just basically, what I'm doing here is just lining them up on the actual stamped image. And once I have them lined up, I'm going to close the door on my MISTI so that it grabs those stamps, and then I'm going to ink those up. And the ink that I used for the stems is the mustard, which is the dark yellow color. And I just press that down really well. And then once I lift up on the door, you can see that it puts the stems on those leaves. And I do that for all of them. So once I finish, I will peel those stamps up and reposition them on the stamps down below. And I will repeat the process. This stamp set also has a stamp with 3 little dots, and I ink those up with the Fresh Asparagus, which is a green color in the same ink pad bundle. And then I just add those dots in random places throughout that card layer. So for the sentiment, I stamped out "Thankful for You" on some white cardstock with some black ink, and I layered it on a piece of purple cardstock. The white sentiment strip is 3 1/4 by 3/4 inches, and then the purple strip is 3 3/8 by 1 inch. And then I layered that entire leaf layer onto a piece of purple cardstock, and that purple cardstock measures 3 3/8 by 8 3/8. So next I was trying to decide if I wanted to have the sentiment at the top or bottom. I ultimately decided to put it at the top because I had a little mess up in the inks up at the top of the card. So I figured if I put it at the top, I would just be able to cover that ink smear with the sentiment. I also stamped out another leaf, and I fussy cut it out with my scissors. Now this stamp set, it may come with a die set because I know a lot of Simon Says stamps do come with matching dies, but I'm not certain at the time of filming. So if there is a die set available, I will link it down in the description box, as well as a link to all of the supplies that I've used on this card. So after adding the sentiment, I decide to go ahead and add the leaf, and I also tied a bow with a piece of twine, and I'm going to add that to the stem on the leaf. So there I'm adding the leaf, and I'm going to add the twine with just a little dot of hot glue. But before I do that, I am going to bring in my Spectrum Sparkle marker and just color up this leaf and just add some glitter to the top. So here's where I'm going to add the bow with some hot glue, and then I'm going to put this on a slimline card base, and the slimline card base is measured at 3 1/2 by 8 1/2 inches. And finally, I add a few gold gems to the front of this card, and that completes this card. So for my next card, I'm going with an A2 size card, and I basically cut a piece of white cardstock 2 3/4 inches by 4 inches, and I was just positioning there. The leaf that I wanted to use, I'm only going to use a single leaf. I'm using the same inks that I used in the previous card, so I'm just stamping out this ink using this teal ink. This is the Blue Lagoon ink from Gina K Designs, and again I'm doing the same method I did on the previous card. I wanted to give those edges a little bit of a darker look, and because I only had one shade of this particular ink, I'm just adding that same ink on the edges so that it will give it a little bit of a darker look on the edges, and then I'm just blending that out on the stamp with my little finger dauber. I do dry it with my heat tool just because I am going to be doing some embossing, and I wanted to make sure that it was completely dry before I did some embossing. So next I'm going to get the matching stem for this particular leaf, and here I just wanted to quickly show you that if you look at your stamp set, you'll see that this is labeled C for this leaf, and then you can see the stem that it corresponds to because they are lettered so that it's easy for you to figure out. So I grab the stem and I position it on top of the leaf, and then I put some of my powder tool down and ink this up with some Versamark ink. And then I'm going to use some gold embossing powder for this stem. So I just sprinkled some of the embossing powder on there, and then I used my heat tool to heat set that. Next, I took a piece of gold mirror paper, and again I'm going to do some embossing. So I inked up the sentiment thanks with some Versamark ink, and then I'm just going to put some white embossing powder on that and heat set that. And then I'll just use my scissors and just trim that down. I am going to bring in some pattern paper. This pattern paper is from an old Lawn Fawn paper pad. It's called Fall Fling, and I don't believe it's available, or at least I couldn't find it online, but if I do happen to find it somewhere, I will link that down below. I basically just inked up the edges of that piece of pattern paper with the same color ink that I used in the leaf, and that paper measured 4 by 5 1/4. So now what I'm doing is just adding my card layers and putting this card together. So I have a piece of gold cardstock that measures 4 1/8 by 5 3/8, and I added that to an A2 size white card base. I did cut the center out of that gold cardstock just because I wanted to keep that extra gold cardstock in my stash. I didn't want to waste it. And then I just cut down a scrap piece of white cardstock and just added it to the center so that when I add the next layer, it will lay flat. So here I'm adding the pattern paper right to the top of that gold layer. And I have another piece of gold cardstock that measures 2 7/8 by 4 1/8. And again, I cut the center out just so that I can keep that center as part of my stash. Added that directly to the front of the card. I also trimmed down a piece of scrap cardstock, and I'll just lay that in the center so that the next layer will lay flat. And I'll add the layer with the leaf right on top of that. And that cardstock with the leaf is measured at 2 3/4 by 4. I'm going to add the sentiment at the bottom, and I will finish that off with some gold gems. So once again, I will put all of the links to all of the products in the description box below. They will also be listed on my blog along with card measurements. And if you liked this video, please give me a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe for more card making tutorials from me. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and have a great day. Bye-bye.